Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And we're back with another segment of fictional women around the world. We're doing a lot of throwbacks lately with our movie choices. Because today we are talking about Paikea Apirana from the 2002 film Whale Rider. She was played by Keisha Castle-Hughes, who was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. It is directed by Nikki Caro and based on the novel of the same name by Wita Ihimara. It was a coming-of-age story that had a sense of place and resonated around the world, and it did win multiple awards. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember the first time I watched it.
It's been a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah, but I remember it being so popular and so many people were talking about it at the time. The plot of the movie follows Maori 12-year-old girl Pai, who's the only surviving child of her family. She grows up with her uncle, grandmother, and grandfather, who is the patriarch and refuses to acknowledge her as the heir. So she was born with a brother. The brother died, and he's not going to allow Pai to be the heir. Her mother and brother died in childbirth, and her mother's last words were Paikea, Paikea. And that's what her father named her against his own father's wishes. However, Pai's father doesn't stick around, and her grandfather only takes her in with great reluctance, believing that she is going to be of no use. Even further, he blames her for what happened and for the tribe's misfortunes. Her father goes on to become an artist on the international scene, and after a brief return home, doesn't listen to his father and refuses to become the tribe's leader. At one point, Pai decides to accompany her father back to Europe, where he has a wife that is expecting a child there, but abruptly asks to be taken back home. Pai is confident that she has the skills to lead the tribe in the face of all of this. When her grandfather pulls together a school for firstborn boys of her age, she attempts to join anyway, but is rebuffed. She enlists the aid of her sympathetic uncle to learn the old ways and traditions, including the Maori fighting stick. One of the boys challenges her to a spar, and her grandfather catches them, telling her that she is making the boys look bad and to apologize to them. Later, her grandfather tosses the tooth of a whale into the water and tasks the boys with finding it as a test to see who will be the next leader. They all fail, and the grandfather becomes depressed, even more so when he attempts to call the Ancient Ones for help, but is ignored. Pai tries calling instead, unbeknownst to him, and is heard. She finds the tooth, but her grandmother informs her that her grandfather is not ready to face the truth about Pai. Pai goes on to make an emotional speech at her school after learning she won the school competition and the regional contest. She had asked her grandfather to come, but he refused to speak to her. Here's a quote. "But I was not the leader my grandfather was expecting, and by being born, I broke the line back to the Ancient Ones. It wasn't anybody's fault. It just happened. But we can learn, and if the knowledge is given to everyone, we can have lots of leaders, and soon everyone will be strong, not just the ones that have been chosen. Because sometimes, even if you're the leader and you need to be strong, you can get tired, like our ancestor Paikea, when he was lost at sea and he couldn't find the land, and he probably wanted to die. But he knew the Ancient Ones were there for him, so he called out to them to lift him up and give him strength. This is his chant. I dedicate it to my grandfather." And through this, she summons a whale pod to her location with her song, and the whales are stranded. Her grandfather's furious, believing this is a signal of the apocalypse, but she rides the largest whale out to the water and leads the rest of them back to safety. She nearly drowns in the process and is rescued. Her grandfather names her leader of the tribe after seeing all of this and seeing that she found the tooth. And that's how it ends. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of themes we can talk about here. And as I said, it was very, it was award-winning, and a lot of people really loved it at the time. Clearly, one of the big themes of this character is empowerment, especially through knowledge and through traditions. she does have this family that is supporting her kind of in the background, and seeing their conversations and interactions. It's really interesting. And being determined, like she was determined. She knew, like, I know I can be good at this. I think we can, with all of this shared knowledge, we'll be stronger. But having to face that sexism, even when she clearly like knew her stuff and could fight and was the one that found the tooth, like all of these things, but always being like, no, this is not for you. But she was determined, and especially like her relationship with her grandfather, where at the end of the speech, it's very much a reaching out and not a like throwing under the bus. It's not like, we were just talking about the difficulties of families and having these disagreements, but being willing to listen and open up and change, and how that can look messy sometimes. And it can take time. So, because I think of like the grandmother being like, oh, he's not ready. But like that slow, no, I'm not going away. I have this. I know this about myself. And at the end, he realized that all the stuff she'd been saying that was right in front of him all along, that he needed to make this change. Like he needed to see her and accept her for the good of everybody. A lot of movies that we talk about in this context, this started a large conversation about representation and who was in it. Because for a lot of people, this was the first time they saw Maori culture in the mainstream. I believe I was watching a clip with the author, and I think it was like the first mainstream Maori book to get published. So it was a big deal in a lot of ways, in that sense. And they talked about like the making of it, and having the people from Maori culture who were reactors or involved in the writing or whatever being like, no, it should, kind of guiding the story and how it should look. You can find a lot of interesting articles about that. And about like, because the director was not Maori. But she had a lot of quotes about how she was handling that. And, you know, ideally, I would say it should have been a Maori director. But there are a lot of interesting conversations you can read about that. There's also a lot of talk about, through Pai's dad, and who goes to Europe and is like, he is exhibiting art there. There's a lot of kind of in the background conversation about colonization and art, and kind of him going away and doing this, and him and the grandfather getting a fight about like, no, you should be here is doing art or whatever it is, but like you shouldn't be in Europe doing it, which is interesting. And you can find a lot of stuff written about that as well. Because I think a lot of people didn't pick up on that the first time, especially if they're not from in any way like that culture.
Right.
But it's definitely there. It's definitely something that is going on. And when Pai almost goes with him to Europe, and then she's like, no, take me back home. That's not going to be my home. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about with this movie. And people are still writing about that, which I love. So I would love to hear, listeners, if you have any thoughts on this character, or this movie, or you have any suggestions for people we should talk about in the future. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you could get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.